How does France pick up the pieces? From the anger over a police shooting and its attempted cover-up to the riots and destruction that have left a local mayor's wife in hospital, has the violence now drowned out the legitimate outrage over what sparked it? There's no justification for looting and destruction, nor for the targeting of law enforcement with firecrackers. Why are so many of those in the streets so young? Was the escalation avoidable? We'll ask about the state's response. Now, in previous crises, the French state was accused of purposely using a heavy hand. After all, the endless loop of fiery images on TV news served the Macron government in turning public opinion against protests, in the case, for instance, of the yellow vests. But is this different? How did we get from the death of 17-year-old Naël to this point? And was it avoidable? Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking how you pick up the pieces. Joining us from her home constituency in Valence in the south of France, French Member of Parliament, Mireille Clapeau from Emmanuel Macron's Renaissance Party. Thanks for being with us.
Hello.
Journalist Paul Moreira, the founder of documentary filmmakers Première Ligne Productions. Welcome back to the show.
Hi.
Security analyst and consultant André Rakoto is with us. How are you?
Thank you very much.
And from Chicago, historian Curtis Young, professor at the Paris Business School, ESSEC. Thanks for being with us.
Glad to be with you, Francois.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation you have on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, the hashtag F24debate. It was a calmer overnight. There were yet more arrests after another appeal for calm by the family of 17-year-old Naël. This while the shock transcended party lines over the weekend attack against the home of the mayor of the southern Paris suburb of L'Haÿ-les-Roses. It's left his wife in hospital. There were rallies across the country. Kathy Kadir-Clifford has more.
A march through L'Haÿ-les-Roses, attended by citizens and elected officials alike. Leading the crowd, Vincent Jeanbrun, the town's mayor, applauded by his constituents. A show of solidarity after a car rammed the mayor's home on Saturday night, setting it on fire. His wife and young children were then attacked with fireworks as they tried to escape.
You don't realize to what extent your presence here is a powerful message, one that is so badly needed.
After 6 nights of riots and looting around the country, triggered by the fatal police shooting of a teenager of North African descent, a new line was crossed in this personal attack.
What happened here is appalling. It's just incomprehensible. Attacking his home and children, they'll be traumatized by this for years. That's why I'm here.
Mayors and residents gathered at dozens of town halls around the country earlier on Tuesday, from Toulouse to Cannes to Paris.
The country needs to react. We need to say no, stop. There needs to be a widespread, solemn protest.
We
have unreservedly condemned violence and attacks against property and people here. Nothing can justify violence.
Some 99 town halls have now been attacked, along with many other public buildings.
No arrests, by the way, have been made in that Saturday attack against the home of the mayor of L'Haÿ-les-Roses. Paul Moreira, how does one explain this?
Well, it's difficult to explain precisely what happened in L'Haÿ-les-Roses. What shocked me is the fact that, and that's new, there is no moral limit now about attacking democratically elected mayors. Like, we know the mayor from Saint-Brévin was threatened. He had cars burned.
Yeah, this was a big deal in France recently. This mayor in Western France who was threatened by far-right militants quit his job, and it sparked a national conversation.
Exactly, and I mean, all this is quite new. The fact that it's so huge and people attacking mayors, local power is totally it's unseen in France. Usually, people will try to have fights with the police, but it's like there's like some kind of private a local war going on between some of the rioters. We have to say that it's only 3 people and they're criminals. They're attacking a home with kids in it, in the house. It's difficult to understand exactly their motives. We have to wait that they'll be arrested and interrogated by the police. But it's true that now some kind of barrier has been crossed, some kind of moral red line has been crossed, that you can attack now a democratically elected figure in France, which is quite shocking, actually.
Mireille Clapeau, why is that? Why has that red line been crossed?
Of course, we have to formally condemn all these fires, shooting, attempts of murder, violence, etc. We have to be firm and to sanction the authors. But finally, we have to understand and to analyze where did it start? Is it because authority was absent in the childhood of these children, because they are young, they are almost children? Was it due to the COVID-19 that had an effect, we know that, on mental health? Is it due to a competition due to the social networks and the video games and all the Snapchats, TikTok applications, etc.? We have to analyze. And certainly we have to put more attention and more money and more energy on this relation between these young people and the authorities, symbolized by a policeman, symbolized by institution. Certainly we have to change something. This violence is not acceptable.
Your home constituency, Mireille, it's got rural areas and urban areas. What are the reactions of citizens?
In my constituency, I have to tell you that during last weeks and last months, we had some terrible events also, but they were not of the same nature because some very young people too had weapons and were killing each other due to drug traffics. And it's a paradox because it was very calm during the riots. It seems that maybe the action of the police, or maybe because the traffickers want to have quiet in the quarters, the suburbs here were calm. But the citizens, the whole majority of the citizens are extremely shocked by this. And there was a meeting at noon organized by the mayor, and everybody was saying, we don't accept that, we never saw that, it's not acceptable.
Curtis Young, the conversation has changed in the last week here in France. It's gone, like we said, and André Rakoto was with us last Thursday when we were discussing how to better police France, the issues of the inequality in the banlieue. Now we're talking about these attacks on state institutions and on representatives of the states. Your thoughts on how that conversation has changed?
Well, the thing is that there's a systemic problem that needs to be addressed, and there's no room for this violence. And when I'm talking about violence, I'm not talking about just what's going on in the streets, but I'm talking about also the extraordinary violence from the side of the police. I believe that if that policeman had seen the face of his cousin or nephew or neighbor or friend's kid, there's no way he would have pulled the trigger. And that he did that is just, you know, Jacques Chirac in 2005, when the 2 kids ran into that ADF box and were electrocuted. Chirac said something to the effect,
sparking 3 weeks of riots, just to remind our viewers.
Yeah, that the nation's future cannot be secured, as I remember, without fighting the poison of discrimination in French society. But how do we deal with the poison of discrimination when we're not even allowed to talk about the idea of discrimination? We can't talk about, for example, demographically, where the kids live, and this sort of thing. So this is not new. I mean, I'm thinking of what is this kid's name? Adama Traore, who died of asphyxiation while he was handcuffed in 2016. I have a very good friend, Francois, French guy, 80 years old. Back in the 1960s, he left France because he got fed up with being beat up by the police. And then once they looked at his identity and recognized that he was French and not Arab, they apologized to him. But he was just Mark was just automatically stopped by the police. Kids of color are 20% more likely to be controlled by the police than other kids. So this is like a pot that is boiling and boiling, and you know, we're pretending like there's no discrimination. Come on, there's discrimination.
Curtis, I want to get back to this point, but how did we go from the how did it go from the legitimate outrage over this killing to looting, wanton looting?
Well, look, there are always people, and you know this, there are always people who take advantage of these situations. The same thing happens here in America, when we have people legitimately trying to redress situations. There are people, there's an aspect of society that will take advantage of that will loot, that will steal, that will destroy things, burn cars, et cetera, et cetera. That's just an element in our society. I wish we could do something about that, because the people who are in the street demonstrating about this, they have a legitimate reason to be doing this. Francois, I mean, come on.
You mentioned 2005. The big difference this time, we look now, there's 3,200 arrests since Tuesday. Average age of those detained, 17. With so many youth involved in the riots, police say they've had to adapt their tactics. Let's listen to the superintendent for the police in the Paris area.
Asked us to deploy, which consisted in significantly increasing our presence and, above all, adopting a more offensive stance, i.e. arresting all troublemakers.
André Rakoto, our correspondent who follows the crime beat at France 24, saying how the initial days, the tactics were to defend state property, and now there's more of a focus on the fact, and it's such a huge challenge, that the perpetrators of this looting and vandalism and attacks are very, very, very young, and that's unseen.
Yeah. Honestly, just one second, I wanted to come back to what was said by my good friend Curtis, who I love to disagree with. Actually, the issue of race, and I understand from, also his story and what France and America have been at some point recently, a couple of decades ago, but the physiognomy of the police forces in both countries have changed. In a city like Los Angeles, more than half of the force is made up of people from minorities. And what's interesting, in New York as well, the chief of police in major cities in America now are people from minorities. What does it change? According to studies, the perception of those policemen, being whatever the color, is that they are policemen. So in the worst areas with a lot of criminality, where you have more people from the minorities, it seems that from the recent studies that the perception of colored policemen from minorities are perceived as policemen, not seen as people from the community. So it is more, I think, an issue of how you train your police, how the police is able to live with their communities where you have the stations, especially in those areas with a lot of, I think, misunderstanding between the police and
because in the United States, you don't have one police force. You have
you got a
police force according to every single township.
Yeah,
you don't. It's not a top-down system.
It's another thing here in France. You have two major forces, plus the municipal police, but the national police is in charge of 5% of the French territory. And this is where those 5%, urban areas, you have the most of the issues, where the gendarmes are in charge of 95% of the territory. The rest of the urban, around urban areas and countryside areas.
So you mentioned the training. Are they trained to handle these very young people?
Well, this is something that is difficult to say because you're trained for every level of the threat. And of course, when you have a kid, it's much more difficult because he's not in the same capacity as an adult, and you must not be treated as an adult. But on the other hand, he has a capacity to do some damage as well. So it's really a matter of balancing force and being able to adapt. And this is something, I think it's a surprise for everyone that the majority of those who were arrested are that young. So it's a problem. But once again, training is the key. We have differences between the training in the gendarmes and the police. They have different territories to take care of. But
what do you do with a 12-year-old? Is it better with a 12-year-old to handcuff them, arrest them, send them to the station to scare them off? Because once they get to the station, they're not going to...
It all depends on what they've done, okay? Because at one point, if you don't show your bill of force, then it's impunity. It means that whatever you do, how many minors in France are arrested and they have several occurrences of refusals to obey to policemen in the street? How many? Refusals to comply.
The Justice Minister has been warning that parents will be prosecuted. There's a 1990 law after a rioting took place that started in the suburbs of Lyon in '89. What do you think? Will that work?
Well, it didn't really work back then. I think this is probably the wrong answer to right issue. There is something going on with the parents, and I have to say, in some areas, trafficking has built itself as a system. We're talking about systemic things. This is systemic.
Trafficking.
Yeah, it is systemic. When you have a project in which most of the families can afford the rent because they are guarding drugs in their apartments and they're getting paid for it, then the local authorities in charge of the projects are going to say, do we want to stop trafficking and not get paid, or do we have to keep trafficking going on? It's a tough question because in those areas, sometimes people buy shoes, 400 euros in the local market, and they pay cash. You know where the money comes from. But buying those shoes cash, it helps create jobs. So it has become a problem where the local economy is intermingled with trafficking so much that if you arrest the guys in charge of trafficking, you kill the economy on top of it.
It's a conundrum. Paul Morero, what's the answer?
Well, we have to look at I think in a broader scope. I started being a journalist 40 years ago. It was 1981, and my first story was in Nanterre. A young Arabic kid was killed, not by the police, by a neighbor, Abdelbi Gemia, I remember his name, and basically nothing happened. And from my whole professional life, I've seen Arabic kids getting shot by police and not much happening by the police who shoot them. I'm not saying that the police is systematically racist. I'm saying that there is either we like it or not, a post-colonial reality that is piling up in this society, and it's ingrained in those communities that they are not equal. They are not equal to the French, and we all know around this table that they're right about that. They're not considered or seen as equal, and they're treated differently, and there is segregation. And there is racial profiling. My son is very dark-haired and he's all the time arrested by police, and all the time he has to justify, his identity, etc., etc. And the other reality that we have to look into is the fact that those neighborhoods have slowly drifted away from the mainstream society. It's true that they have some of those places have gone into drug trafficking and all kind of illegal economical schemes. We again, I mean, it's something that is it's not something that we can judge just by anecdotes. We have to look at the broader perspective on that. But just to give an example, that tax offices, some tax offices have been burned. There's nothing to loot, but basically they are burned. And when you discuss with the kids who burn those places, they say that they burn the places where the tickets are. Those kids, of course, they ride the motorcycles, they ride scooters, they ride whatever, and they get a lot of tickets. And that's something that I've not investigated, but I realized talking with people that some of them have so many tickets that they cannot have their own bank account anymore, because the money would be seized right away because of the fines that are so high and repeated and unanswered. And somehow we don't realize that all structurally that pushes people towards a cash economy. And what is a cash economy? It's an illegal economy. It's drugs trafficking, it's selling stuff, it's stuff that was stolen. And I mean, there is, I think now we need to seize the moment and try to open a dialogue between the people from the ghettos and police and institutions and see what we can say. Because I think community policing was a solution. Police de proximité, we say in French. It used to work. I mean, it's not paradise, but it used to work. It was slashed by President Sarkozy. I don't know. I think it would be naive to think that we can go back to that. But still, I mean, there are options that have to be discussed, and we have to dig deep into the roots of the hatred. I must say myself, I was utterly shocked by what I've seen on those 4 days of riot, because the level of violence is much higher than 2005. And they're coming to the center of the towns, which is a message. It's like, we come from the ghettos and we're going to scare you. It's like, for me, it's like class warfare somehow.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Class warfare, you're saying. Mireille Clapeau was mentioning the other dimension, which is the digital one. Now, it's we've seen in the last 48 to 72 hours, people filming themselves looting. In the eastern city of Strasbourg, young people keep one hand on their cell phone while they break into a shoe store to loot. In other cases, young people live stream the action from rooftops of housing projects on sites like Periscope, like in the southern suburb of Grigny. The French president and his justice minister have both singled out the instant messaging site Snapchat, where the single-use posts disappear once they've been opened.
I want for young people to know in a very clear way that the prosecutors of this country will find the identities of the users of social media, namely Snapchat, that are for these youngsters a means to communicate, to provide the time, the place and the target of the aggression. Let no one think that behind social media there's impunity.
André Rakoto, Snapchat part of the problem?
Well, there is no question that the social media entertains some sort of a competition between different people who are, watching themselves on those media and trying to show they can do more than the others. It's also helping because the police, the gendarmes are monitoring those social networks, social media, and sometimes they can prevent actions because those who are bragging about attacking that particular place or that particular store or place, it can be prevented because this gives the authorities some intelligence about what's going to happen. So it goes both ways, I think. But yes, at the time of the Traoré riots back in 2016, the local law enforcement commander obtained that the press would not talk at all about the riots. And so there was no duplication of what was being seen on TV by others trying to replicate and so on. And in a sense, it helped because the media did not bring to the TVs, the homes of the people around what was going on that much. And somehow, when you don't have echoes about what you're doing, at some point, you don't do it anymore.
Paul Moreira, of course, there's ethics issues involved in all of this. You've reported on protests that turn violent in this country.
Sure. I mean, that's the big challenge is for the police is how to handle that type of protests, because it's not a political traditional political protest. So the question of the weaponry it's at the center on the center of the table. I've seen that the raid has been involved in controlling the riots in Marseille. The raid is like special forces. They have upgraded their weaponry. They went from LBD to bean bags, plastic bullets. We have seen armored vehicles in the streets, stuff that you usually see in a war zone. So we're entering a new world of low-intensity warfare that is kind of scary. I mean, we really
and it's stuff purchased on the internet, particularly in the case of the fireworks. A lot of them purchased in places like Poland, I'm told.
Yeah. I was actually in the middle of in my neighborhood. I live in a working class area, and so I went down and saw what was going on. There was some arson and some fireworks. It's quite spectacular. It's not very dangerous because I was in the middle of it, but it's very visual. It's like, see us. I think you really have to be unlucky to be hit by those things, but it's certainly incredibly visual, and it seems to be the weapon of the new weapon of the ghettos, those fireworks.
Yeah, two of the biggest police unions putting out a statement last Friday that shocked people. They denounced, quote, hordes of savages. Mireille Clapeau, what was your reaction when you heard that from those two police unions, the strong language that was used, particularly when you're talking about here what Paul Moreira was referring to earlier, the need to build dialogue and restore trust?
These words are certainly part of the problems. When you qualify young citizens, because they are young citizens at the end of the day, and you qualify them with such aggressive words, it can only put fuel on the fire. And certainly it's part of the problem, because it's part of the training they should have to be trained to face these new forms of conflicts. It's about communication, verbal communication, written communication on Twitter, on the social networks, and non-verbal communication. Certainly, they are not enemies. They are not savages. They are young citizens. When they are under 18, they have some rights. They need to be educated. They need to be accompanied if they do something. And certainly not being shown as enemies. So I disapprove.
André Rakoto?
Well, I wanted to say that, as a matter of fact, when you are dealing with those situations, and those young guys are to be handled as young people, of course. And I think that adapting your means to who they are is important. And I heard things that are amazing to me. I mean, the fact that we use armored vehicles in the streets. In the United States, the National Guard comes in the street with war vehicles. They have Humvees, they have tanks, Bradleys, and so on that they can use. I mean, if you look at the pictures from Ferguson, the riots, you will see lines of military equipment in desert,
surplus
camouflage.
military equipment that was sold to police departments.
And the National Guard comes in with their Humvees, which are camouflage and so on, in the streets. In France, I mean, this is not new that we use armored vehicle, and they are very good means of deterrence, including against younger people, because we can manage them, use them to deter the threat. We are right now changing our equipment in the gendarmerie. The old VBRG, some of them have been in service for 4 decades. There's nothing new there, right? 4 decades for the new Centaurus vehicles. And these are they're painted in blue. They are regular crowd control vehicles used to deter. They have not killed anyone in 40 years, and these are part of the deterrence equipment of the gendarmes.
But this statement that was put out by those two police unions last Friday shocked a lot of people. Did it shock
and they
you?
should. I'm very sorry, but each time the press is having conversations with the unions, they should remember these are the unions, not official police organizations. They're unions. They are not the authorities. They are talking on behalf of the policemen as a union. So whatever they say, depending on where they are placed on the political scale, is going to be different. Unions are unions. So, like politics are politics, and like on the scale of opinions, you will get things that will be sometimes just horrific, and things that will be acceptable. So this is where they are. But the way the police forces in this country, the law enforcement community, is trying to adapt what's going on, is also based on who they are. And if you look at the physiognomy of the French law enforcement forces today, municipal police forces, gendarmes, national police, they look more and more, and more than 20 years ago, or 30 years ago, or in 2005, this is completely different, they look more and more like the community they serve with. They are more and more diverse. And look at Traoré in 2016. 4 gendarmes involved. 2 of them were from minorities. Nobody talks about that, okay? It's very important to say that the police forces have changed, and there are more and more people from the minorities within the ranks. Among those unions of the police who have said things that were probably very critical, there are people from the minorities.
Curtis Young, your thoughts?
Well, the thing is, look, there are violent black policemen, violent white policemen, so it's not a question of what color they are. It's a question of the training of a policeman. One of the things that's interesting, I'm in Chicago, and I'm here where there's the Obama Foundation, and one of the things that these guys have put together is an organization called My Brother's Keeper, which is an organization to create safe and healthy communities for youth to grow up in. Because just like in France, if you look at the data, but we can't look at the data in France, but if we did look at the data and disaggregate for race and gender, all of the positive statistics, income, 2-family home, et cetera, 2-parent home, et cetera, good in education, our guys of color are at the bottom. All of the negative, they're at the top. And so this is an initiative to create positive approach, collective action, bringing the whole community together, public, business, NGOs, community leaders, et cetera, to look after the kids. Having more police, black, white, Arab, or otherwise, with vehicles, whether they're old or new, armored, with people saying that these children are savages. There's no justification for saying such a thing. This is not the more violence is not the answer. How do we create safe and healthy communities for these guys? How do we use our experience, Andre, in order to look? When I was 17 years old, I used to take my mom's car without a driver's license and do exactly the same kind of things that these kids were doing. Thank goodness some cop didn't come up and shoot me. It could have happened. What I'm saying is kids, these are children who do the things that we've all done as children. We haven't been caught, all right? But to criminalize these kids, to treat them as, to call them savages, to threaten them, the only thing this is going to do is exacerbate a horrible situation. It's not going to take it apart. Last thing, I just want to say one quick thing. Interestingly enough, Andre, you can look this up. It's in yesterday's New York Times. In Minneapolis, half of the police force quit. Crime dropped. There was a relationship because the police were fed up with being treated so badly after the George Floyd kind of situation. Half of the force quit, and the community pulled.
Well, let me ask you this, Curtis, because you don't hear in France calls to defund the police like you have in the United States. Why is that? Even in even in places like Nanterre, where they have a bone to pick, they're not saying defund the police. Why is there that difference?
No, but there's a different cultural relationship with the police in France, as I see it, than the police, as you pointed out earlier. Each city, 48 different states, how many different cities has its own police department? That's not the case in France. You have a national police, as Andre pointed out earlier, and a gendarme. So the idea of defunding this doesn't make any sense in the French context, as far as I can see. But what I would love to hear is not calls, because it's just 2 years ago that police in France were given were told that they were allowed to be more violent. It's just since then that we're beginning. This is the third time a policeman has shot a citizen. That's unacceptable. That's like Andre. In terms of color, again, I want to say it's not the color of the skin, it's the heart. How do we feel, whether we're black, white, or otherwise? How do we feel about these kids? Are they savages? Are they kids? Are there people who can, with support from the adult community, from the public community, from business communities, from NGOs, from community leaders, can we do something to create a safe and healthy community for these kids to grow up in? That's the idea. This is our future that we're talking about. These kids are our future, and we have to start treating them with respect, dignity.
And that brings us to words last Friday that were from which there was pushback from the French government in France. Whereas twice Curtis has pointed out, we're going to have to quickly cross over to the Prime Minister's office. Elisabeth Borne, who's been meeting with elected officials about the events of the last 6 days.
The tragic death of the 17-year-old youngster during a traffic check, and a lot of violence in our country. There was a lot of discussion. The leaders told their opinion. There's a broad range of opinion, but people basically agreed to thank the police, the firefighters that have to meet a lot of violence, and also to support the elected officials that are standing in the front line. There's also a lot of convergence in terms of saying that the priority is to restore order in the Republic. And this means that we have to heighten the security system in the coming nights. This emergency raises a lot of issues, and the various presidents of the groups also mentioned those issues. I think we'll have an opportunity to meet again and to deepen those discussions. Today, our priority is to restore order in the Republic and to maintain order, to do the necessary policing, and to have a strong criminal stand towards criminal, as the Minister for Justice said. A few days ago, a far-right man said a lot of people want to shut down the contribution fund for the policeman who killed Nell. And this seems to be representative of the contradictions in society. It is not up to the government to say whether there should be a collection fund or not. It is up to the courts to say whether it is legal or not, whether it is a far-right man who launches that fund. Well, he probably is not in favor of social peace. I don't want to give you a personal opinion. I want to state what is legal or not. It is up to the courts to state whether it's legal or not. Some people in some social alliance said that we are at war. Do you think we are at war, and what should we do? Mathilde Panot decided to leave the meeting. I believe her behavior is very strange in comparison with other group leaders who thought it was critical and necessary in the current circumstances to take time to discuss, to exchange opinions. And that discussion enables us to share the needs we face and to secure the safety of all Frenchmen. And all other group leaders agreed. This is the priority.
Écoutez, moi je note que, en dehors effectivement de la présidente Panot qui a souhaité quitter la réunion,
aside from President
tous les
Panot,
autres
who left the
présidents
meeting,
de
the other group leaders wanted to
jusqu'au bout,
take
ont
part in that
partagé,
meeting until the very
la
end,
priorité qui est
and
d'assurer la
we
sécurité des Français, d'assurer
agreed that
le
the
retour de l'ordre
priority is to
républicain,
secure
et puis de se
security
dire qu'effectivement
and
il y
to
aura un autre
restore
temps, un temps de
order,
réflexion
and then later
sur
on
les
we'll
causes,
have to reflect
sur les
on the
enseignements
causes
tirés de cette
and the
crise,
teachings that
et
we have to
je pense
draw
que nous avons
out
tous
of
pu
this
partager le
emergency.
souhait de
We
continuer
all
à échanger
share
ensemble sur ce
in
sujet.
wishing that we want to keep on discussing these issues. What about policing and city policies? What is your stand? Many issues were taken up regarding the urban policies, the role of schools, the role and responsibility of parents. All those issues, we have to take time to reflect on them, and the President mentioned as much. Currently, we have to restore order, to secure safety for retailers, citizens, artisans, everyone. We have to think this through, and there'll be more discussion with group leaders on all those issues. Thank you.
There you heard the French Prime Minister saying that consultations with various political groups are work in progress. The head of the parliamentary group for the far left, La France Insoumise, who left the meeting early by the account there of Elisabeth Borne. So there have been political differences on a day when otherwise there has been a lot of unity across the country in supporting the mayors of France after that attack. We mentioned it at the outset of our conversation. Mireille Clapeau, twice during our conversation here, we had Curtis Young alluding to the fact that because of France's secularism laws, you're not allowed to give racial statistics. You're not allowed to put a finger on it. And we've seen in the last 6 days a lot of people from your political camp take exception to that UN Human Rights Commission report, talking about the problem of racism in the police and structural racism in the police, saying that that's not fair, that in France that is not the case. There isn't institutional racism. Should there be more of a conversation on race when the French president, for instance, goes to places like Marseille to talk about inequality? Should he also talk about racial profiling, the way Paul Moreira described it earlier?
Well, I don't think it's a good solution. I am personally very attached to the republic we have with the secularism. Liberté, égalité, fraternité, and laïcité. And I don't think it's a racial problem because, of course, the first name can be different, but you can never guess by seeing somebody, whether he's French, whether his parents are Algerian, whether he's a mix of all these thoughts.
But what's your reaction when you hear blacks and people who look North African say they get stopped all the time by the cops?
That's a reality, and I know some people that have a black face, and they have trouble with that. So we have again to educate and to train the police. We have to stop that. It's not racial statistics that will happen because it's open a box where there are some bad souvenirs from our past, and I don't think this is neither the problem nor the solution to have these statistics. But we have to put a spell on to insist on education, relation of these young people with the policemen. We have to think of the responsibility of the parents and to help the parents. And we have to globally take this problem of these young people that have a problem with authority and a problem with their future, because at the end of the day, it's which future they imagine for themselves. Looting shops and using fireworks against firemen or policemen cannot be a good direction for their future. And it's a responsibility of the whole society.
Paul Moreira, we're almost out of time. We were promised big discussion after 2005 and those 3 weeks of rioting. What are you expecting this time?
Well, I want to say very shortly that there's only two options nowadays in our societies. It's either we continue building walls and zoning and creating ghettos. And I've lived in Paris for so many years, and I still remember Paris was a mixed city with working class and bourgeoisie and middle class, and we were all mixed. And I'm not saying it was a paradise. I'm just saying that social mixity is the only way out if we don't want this kind of warlike situation that we have seen that is unbearable at all levels. It's unbearable. So yes, I think we have to now engineer a new city that will be with less walls, less zoning, more mixity, and it's going to be on the very long run. And in the midterm, we have to create a strong police that is able to speak and open a dialogue and is strongly trained, because yes, there's a problem with the training of the police.
We'll leave it there for now. Paul Moreira, I want to thank you so much for joining us. I want to thank as well Mireille Clapeau for being with us from Valence, Curtis Young in Chicago, André Rakoto. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.